Let me introduce to you our brand new Quick Settings Trigger, or QST in short. You know, all our triggers on all our FX rifles and the previous impacts are already phenomenal. You might have experienced yourself already. But now in the M4 with the QST, or the Quick Settings Trigger, we just took it one step more forward. So we created a trigger which houses actually 3 triggers in one. On one side you have a true hunter trigger, then you can adjust it to be the standard FX trigger that you all know and love, and then you can make a pure match grade trigger out of it, which breaks like glass and is feather light. As the name implicates, Quick Settings Trigger, it is quick and easy to set it from one trigger to the other one once you know exactly how all the screws work together. Therefore, in this video, I'm going to take you through the complete trigger unit, and by the end of the video, I promise you, you're going to be the M4 QST trigger expert. So let's get started. Right, so the quickset trigger unit, as you can see right here, I pulled it out of the M4 to show you exactly how the inner workings are, and it also allows me to explain a little bit better what any of the adjustment screws does with the inner workings and why some settings are activated with some of those screws. As you can see, the inner workings of the quickset trigger on the M4 is quite a lot different than the one on the M3, with some extra parts, for instance like the second sear right here, and that's one of the reasons why the quickset trigger unit is not backwards compatible with the M3 and is solely for the M4 only. The inner workings, as you can see right here, it's more or less for the technical guys, so you can exactly see how the inner workings are right there, with that top bar, the spring that interacts with that bar with a bend into it. That bend is in order to incorporate that second sear right there, and they all interact with one of the adjustment screws right there. So let me put this part quickly to the side and first go over exactly what all the screws do and what they can adjust. So, taking a closer look at the trigger bar itself, let's first start off with the trigger shoe itself. Taking a look at the trigger shoe, that is one adjustment that you can already make, and that is easily done. The screw here on top, if you undo that one, allows you to slide the complete trigger shoe more forward, more backwards, depending on you have maybe some smaller hands, some bigger hands, and very important to get that straight trigger pull backwards. One adjustment you can make by simply locking that screw. You can lock it into place. And the second adjustment you can make on the trigger shoe is with this small screw right here. And when you undo this one, you can slide the trigger shoe up, down. You can cant it left, right, just the way you want it to get that perfect straight trigger pull. This all by itself is already a very important adjustment on your trigger, allowing you to get that perfect trigger pull. Then let's have a look at all the adjustment screws, or what they do exactly. So let's turn the trigger bar just this way, and let's start off with the front one. The front one is actually the one that controls the travel of your trigger. So by adjusting this one, you can add more travel to your trigger or less travel, just the way you want it. The silver screw right behind the travel screw, this one right here, is not to be altered. This is just a fixing screw for that pivot point or that pivot block you see right there. Right behind the silver one, this one right here, that is actually your first stage adjustment screw, and what this does is it allows you to control the back wall of your first stage. And then we come to the good stuff, that is the hole right behind your first stage, and that is your second stage adjustment screw. In this case, the one here just after the first stage one is the one that controls your match grade trigger. So meaning if we put our screw, the one that is now in the standard FX one, into the match grade one, that will activate your match grade trigger. As I mentioned, the one then right behind our match grade one, the one right here, which is now activated, that is your standard FX trigger. And by adjusting this one, you can set the second stage, and this screw will be your standard FX trigger. The hole right behind that one right here, this is not to be used by the user or not to be altered by the user. There are also no threads inside, so you can't thread a screw in that one. And what it actually gives you access to is to that small adjustment screw on your second sear. This is set from factory, perfect, and not to be used or altered by the end user. And then our third adjustment, or our third trigger on the quickset trigger unit, is the hole right here, and that is the hole where you can screw in your activation screw and adjust the break of your second stage, or your second stage for your hunter trigger. Then the last screw in the row that is the one which controls or can be altered to activate or to control your safety. So let's say, for instance, your safety is not engaging anymore after you adjusted any of the previous screws, then you can use that one to make sure that your safety is working again. I'll keep this one to the side and explain you on the rifle itself, start adjusting any of these screws to any of the 3 different trigger settings, and this one I can exactly show you how all those screws interact with each other. The way how it actually works is our activation screw for any of our 3 triggers. The more you mount that activation screw forward, the lighter your trigger pull will be. Putting it more backwards, the heavier your trigger will before it breaks. And therefore, we can create a pure match grade one, mounting it right in the front. Mounting it a little bit more backwards gives you that normal FX standard trigger, and mounting that activation screw all the way at the back gives you that hunter trigger pull with a lot more force needed in order for that trigger to break. Just the way you wanted, 3 triggers in one with a quick set trigger unit. So I got a beautiful M4 Black Edition right here in front of me, and I have the trigger unit that I pulled out of the impact in front of me, so I can explain you exactly what those screws do and how they interact. The first part we will be starting off is with the travel of the trigger. To adjust the travel on your trigger, we need to adjust that screw here right at the front. By screwing this in clockwise, that will push our trigger base more like this and reduces the amount of travel. When you screw it counterclockwise, your trigger base will become more like this, and the spring is pushing down on it, creating a lot more travel before those screws activate. So by adjusting or altering that screw here in front, we can alter the amount of travel that our trigger has to make. So let me show it to you. Take another Allen key. Let's cock the rifle, and as you can see, we have just about this amount of travel. Now the key here is of course to make very small and tiny adjustments in order to set up your trigger. I'm going to exaggerate in this video so you can see exactly what those settings are doing. So going clockwise, you can see our trigger bar is moving upwards, and now there is no second stage anymore. We are right about at the break point of our second stage by screwing it too much inwards. So let's go counterclockwise, which takes that screw out. And as you can see, the trigger bar is coming down, and this gives us a lot more travel on your trigger. So this is to adjust according to your preference, and therefore you can adjust it exactly the way you want it, the amount of travel you want, by screwing on that screw right there. That's right about where I would like to have mine. So with that travel screw adjusted, we can move on to the next screw right there, and that is actually our first stage, or actually the back wall of your first stage. So the more you screw that screw in, the more it will push onto that part right here of the second sear, and therefore will control your back wall of your first stage. Now it has to be said that all your activation screws of your match grade trigger, standard trigger, or hunting trigger, they all work together with your first stage screw, as some of you might know. So you might need to adjust both of them to get that perfect feeling. Right now, at this point, to give you an example, our break point is about 1 millimeter before that block right here gets flush with the body itself. So let's now screw that way out. Again, here you need to make small adjustments on these screws. I'm just exaggerating just to show you the difference. And as you can now see, our break point happens only when the trigger goes inside the block, and therefore we have moved the wall of the first stage a lot more backwards by adjusting this screw itself. Let me put it more or less back where it was. Maybe just a little bit more. Perfect. Now it breaks exactly when my trigger block right here goes into the block. So with your first stage set, it is now time to activate one of the 3 triggers. So now at this point in the example right here, the first screw is activated, which is your match grade. When you move that screw to the hole right behind it, you can activate your standard FX trigger, and when you move it to the hole right behind the trigger shoe itself, you can activate your hunter trigger. As I mentioned before, your activation screw, or any of when you put that screw into any of the 3 activation holes, that is your second stage breakpoint actually. So these screws, they all work together, so it doesn't matter if you have that activation screw in the match, the standard or the hunter one, it always corresponds with your first stage back wall right there. Adjusting that screw will also alter that screw, as they all work together, or with the top bar right there, or with the second sear right here. Let me show you. So now for the example, we have the match grade screw right in there. And the only thing you have to do is screw it inwards until the moment it engages with that sear right there. So let me show you. Now at this point, our trigger is engaging. So let me back off on the match grade activation screw, or your second stage screw. And at this point you can see that screw is not activating or not working together with your first stage, pushing onto that sear right there, and therefore the trigger doesn't do anything. The point here is to screw it in. Maybe start with quarter turns every time until your trigger is engaging. At this point it is engaging already, and that is just about perfect. If you find that your breakpoint of your second stage is a little bit too late, you can also alter again your first stage one, and therefore play with both of those screws in order to get the exact breakpoint you want. Small adjustments go a long way. I might activate my first stage just a little bit more. Playing around with both of those screws also can eliminate the creep on your second stage if you want, and therefore playing with those screws together will get you to that perfect trigger you're looking for. That was the match grade, and now let's move that screw a little bit further backwards and activate the FX standard trigger. Right, so now all I have done is moved our match grade trigger activation screw from the match grade hole one backwards to the standard FX one. And at this moment the situation is just like this, with the screw just sticking out a little bit. And when you cock the rifle right now, you can see our trigger is not engaging. So therefore we need to go counterclockwise and screw that screw in just a little bit more so that it engages with the trigger sear. As you also can see, when we activate that screw, it will push a lot further backwards on that second sear, and therefore you will have a little bit heavier trigger pull, getting you to that standard FX trigger. So let's go in quarter of a turn, and let's see if it engages. Not yet. So let's go another quarter of a turn. Not yet. And you just want to come to the point where it engages to start with. Almost there, but it's quite a heavy pull. So another quarter of a turn. And as you can see, there is quite a big difference between the match grade one and the standard FX one. And all I have done now is just move that screw from the match grade hole all the way to that FX standard trigger, and therefore give you a lot heavier breakpoint than your match grade one. And you can exactly choose what you prefer. Again here, if you find that your breakpoint is a little bit too late, you can also start altering your first stage again, and therefore give you that perfect balance. Great, that is the standard FX trigger. Now let's move it one hole more backwards and get you to that hunter stage one. Right, so now I have moved our activation screw from the standard FX one to the hunter one. And one big difference you can see now right here is that our first stage is still pushing on that second sear here in the front, where our match grade and our standard FX one were also pushing to activate it. Now the hunter one is all the way right here at the back and pushes on that bigger block right in front of that second sear. That's why it might be that you need to adjust your hunter activation screw a little bit deeper than the other two holes in order for it to activate. So let's see now. At this point, the screw is not activated yet. So let's screw that in, quarter of a turn. And there we have it already, with a firm first stage back wall, and then with a little bit more effort, perfect for your hunters, you have your hunter stage. Again here, this second stage and the first stage screw, they go hand in hand. So if you find that you have a little bit too much creep on your second stage, for instance, on any of the activation screws, you can play around with both of them to get that perfect, crisp little break. By moving that screw from the match to the FX standard one to the hunter one, by moving that screw backwards, you create a little bit more force needed in order for your trigger to break, and that's why this trigger system is so brilliant. The only thing I did from the beginning, since we have set our travel and our first stage, is just move that screw all the way backwards, screw it in until it activates or engages with your trigger system, and that is all there is to it to set your quick set trigger from one setting to the next one. And then we have one final screw, which is also very important, and that is the one that makes the safety, or make sure that the safety engages. It might be possible by adjusting any of the activation screws or your first stage that your safety is not engaging anymore. Therefore, you always need to check this, cock your rifle, put it on safe, and as you can see in this example, our safety is not engaging. So all you do is screw that last screw more inwards. I went now one full turn, and as you can see, our safety is now perfectly working, making sure you can't fire the rifle when it's put on safe. Putting it back on fire, same hunter trigger as before. So let's have a quick little recap about the quick set trigger on the Impact M4. Starting off with the first screw here in the front, which allows you to adjust the travel of your trigger, increase or decrease it. The screw right here is your adjustment screw for your first stage, which pushes onto that front little part right here of the second sear. And then at the moment, the activation screw of the match grade trigger is inside, and you can move this one to the standard FX one or to the hunter one as well. Once you have set your travel and your first stage, it's as simple as screwing this one out, placing it to the next hole, just activating, and then your trigger is good to go. Now, the second stage screw or the activation screw of any of your three triggers works together with that first stage screw, and therefore you can perfectly tune the trigger just the way you like it. The hole right here above the trigger shoe, which has no threads inside, is not to be altered by the user. This gives access to the second sear right there, but is set perfectly from factory. Also seen in the beginning of the video is that the whole trigger shoe and the position of it can be changed with just two little screws to get that perfect straight trigger pull. And then once you're done with all your adjustments on your trigger, it's always good to check your safety, which can be adjusted with the screw right at the back. Right guys, that is everything you need to know about the Quick Settings Trigger Unit, or QST in short, in order to set it from one trigger to the next one, if you want to go from a Hunter to a standard FX one to that pure match grade trigger. Super phenomenal to have 3 trigger units all in one, which can be quickly and easy be set to a different one depending on which discipline you want to shoot. If there was something not clear in the video, or you do have some additional questions regarding the QST, please put them in the comment section down below and I'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you back in the next one. Bye.